God calls us to forgive. But when I forgive someone for their wrongdoing, it feels like they've been let off the hook. We know that in God's eyes, mercy triumphs over judgment. But where does that leave justice? Forgiveness is a tough call. A friend of mine once said it seems to be the most unnatural thing in the world. When we're wronged, it's natural to want revenge because something inside of us seeks justice. And justice is a good thing. Our desire for it is one of the ways we reflect God's image. It's a divine quality. So what do we do when we obey God and forgive the perpetrator, but they seem to get away with it? It's important to remember that just because we forgive someone doesn't mean we're condoning their actions. It also doesn't mean that they won't suffer the consequences of their actions. God promises that He will execute justice in His way and His time. When we follow God's call to forgive and refuse revenge, we are trusting in what God says. The truth is, even our own justice systems can fail. People are wrongly accused. Guilty people are set free. Sentencing can be inappropriate, and the punishment doesn't always fit the crime. We must never make our capacity to forgive dependent on the justice that may or may not follow. We are called to forgive and trust God's justice regardless. It's also helpful to remember that God's justice is always restorative, not retributive. There's a profound difference. Let me share a story with you to illustrate. Several years ago, a number of young Australian men were arrested for trafficking drugs into Bali. Indonesian law is very strict on drug crimes, and they were all sentenced to death. While in prison awaiting their execution, two of the men, Andrew Chan and Mayuran Sukumaran, decided to follow Jesus. They confessed the guilt of their crimes, and they saw their lives transformed. They began rehabilitation work in the prison. They set up a computer room and led art projects. Andrew began leading worship services. Soon, the whole atmosphere of the prison changed as the prisoners' lives were touched by their efforts. Soon it came time for the Indonesian justice system to carry out its judgment. Andrew and Mayuran were to die by firing squad. In response, a large campaign to save their lives gathered momentum throughout their home country, Australia. Prayer vigils and special gatherings were held with thousands in attendance. In Bali, prisoners even offered to take their place. Andrew and Mayuran also pleaded to live their lives, the rest of their lives in prison. They weren't asking for release. They knew they were guilty. But they were asking for a restorative approach to justice. The difference is in the goal. Bishop Desmond Tutu explains in his book No Future Without Forgiveness that retributive justice is punitive, while restorative justice is concerned about the healing of breaches, the redressing of imbalances, restoration of broken relationships. It seeks to rehabilitate both the victim and the perpetrator. Sadly, the campaign for Andrew and Mayuran failed, at least in one sense. As retributive justice unfolded and they were led to the firing squad, the power of restorative justice was evident. Guards hugged them and apologised, and Andrew and Mayuran worshipped and sang God Bless Indonesia as they took their last breath. As God's people, we are called to follow the example of Jesus, to strive to forgive and refuse to settle for an eye-for-eye form of justice. As Jesus said, "You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And later, forgive others as your heavenly Father has forgiven you." Thanks for tuning into Everyday God Conversations today. I trust that's been helpful and you'll find the grace to forgive. For more on forgiveness and how to have your own God conversations, subscribe to the fortnightly God Conversations newsletter at godconversations.com.